Don't forget to like and subscribe. I live in the northern outskirts of Montana. Most of the state is made up of small towns and long roads stretching between them. I reside in one of these small towns, consisting of maybe 40 to 50 buildings total and barely covering the area of a square mile. The next nearest town is an hour's drive away. My cabin-style home is down a trail, set apart from the town center. I live alone with my dog, Jake, but I find the solitude peaceful. At least, I did until one particular night made me reconsider. Being so far from civilization, I never worried much about anything happening. But then I realized that was exactly why I should have been worried. I work remotely, so just like any other day, I finished up at 5 and then took Jake for a long walk. We usually followed a trail I had carved out behind my house through the woods. It was midwinter, so the air was crisp and a light snowfall covered the ground. I walked Jake for about 20 minutes before the sun began to dip below the horizon, deciding it was time to turn back. As we made our way home, Jake suddenly perked his head up and froze, staring straight ahead. It was already growing dark, but I could still see well enough to notice that there was nothing in front of us. I urged him forward, and he eventually followed, but then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Footprints. They weren't mine, and they certainly weren't Jake's. Someone had walked across my trail, not along it, but directly through the trees, heading straight toward my house. I would have seen them earlier, so they had to be fresh. Someone had passed by within the last 10 minutes. I tightened my grip on Jake's leash and hurried home as the snowfall thickened. When I stepped out of the tree-line, the house was barely visible through the snow and darkness. An uneasy feeling settled over me, making the warm glow of my cabin seem less inviting than usual. When we reached the door, I glanced around, but everything seemed normal. Jake wasn't acting nervous, which put me at ease, at least a little. I took off his leash and tried to shake the eerie feeling that clung to me, but I couldn't. I needed to check the perimeter of the house. Grabbing my coat, I stepped back outside. The snow was falling harder now, making it difficult to see anything, let alone footprints. I walked around to the left side of the cabin, scanning the ground for any signs of disturbance. That's when Jake started barking. The sudden noise sent a jolt through my body. I spun around and ran back to the front of the house, rushing inside. Jake stood near the back door, his tail tucked between his legs, growling lowly. His eyes were locked on the door. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I followed his gaze and my stomach dropped. A small puddle of water sat just inside the doorway, melting snow. I flipped on the backyard light and saw them. Footprints. They led right up to the back door, then veered around the side of the house. Someone had been here. My heart pounded as I ran to grab my hunting rifle. It wasn't the most practical for self-defense, but at least it was something. I felt vulnerable, unsure of who this person was or what they wanted. But the fact that they had gotten so close, had maybe even tried to get inside, meant they were willing to take a risk. I carefully moved to the right side of the house and flipped on the exterior lights. As I pulled back the curtain to look outside, I heard it. Loud, heavy footsteps running away. Jake barked wildly, but I couldn't see anything through the thick snowfall. My hands trembled as I stepped away from the window, my rifle still clutched in my hands. I stayed on high alert for hours, every creak of the house making my skin crawl. Calling the police wasn't much of an option. Out here, their response time was slow, and by the time they'd arrive, whoever had been lurking outside would be long gone. I reported it in the morning, but nothing ever came of it. To this day, I have no idea who it was or what they wanted, but I do know that living in isolation doesn't always mean you're alone. This next incident happened to me several years ago when I was in college. It was the start of winter break, and we had just finished our finals. The school gave us a few days to pack up and leave, as they didn't allow students to stay in the dorms over the break. Most of my friends left immediately, eager to get home. My parents, However, were driving in to pick me up on the last available day. I didn't mind the quiet. In fact, I kind of enjoyed having the dorm building mostly to myself. That changed the night before I was set to leave. It was about 10 at night when I turned off my lights and got into bed. Not even 5 minutes later, a knock at the door made me jump. My heart pounded. I wasn't expecting anyone. The building was nearly empty. Who could possibly be knocking? Slowly, I got out of bed and walked to the door. When I opened it, I was met with the sight of a tall man, bundled up in a winter jacket. He looked like a student, but I didn't recognize him. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice cautious. He hesitated before speaking. "Hey, have you seen a guy around here?" I frowned. "Who?" He didn't give me a name, just a vague description. I hesitated. "Why are you looking for him?" The man seemed caught off guard by my question. He stumbled over his words before mumbling something about being his roommate and not knowing where he had gone. Something felt off. If he was really looking for his roommate, wouldn't he have given me a name? And why knock on my door specifically? A chill ran down my spine. "No, I haven't seen anyone," I lied, my hand tightening on the doorknob. The man nodded, but didn't leave right away. He lingered, looking past me into my room before finally turning and walking down the hallway. I locked the door immediately. The uneasy feeling didn't leave me for the rest of the night. To this day, I don't know who that man was, but I'm certain he wasn't looking for a missing roommate, and I'm glad I didn't let him in. There for a moment, I was thinking of what to do before he interrupted my thoughts and asked me something really bizarre. "Can I check if he's in your room?" I immediately said no and began shutting the door. The guy stopped me, though, putting his hand on the other side. He wasn't trying to push it open, but he was pushing hard enough to keep me from closing it. I told him to back off as sternly as I could, but he again asked me to check my room. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I knew I needed to find a way out of this quickly before it escalated into something a lot worse. I only had a few seconds to think, and I realized in those moments that I'd already messed up by opening the door in the first place. I guess spending so much time living in a dorm, I never had a reason to fear opening my door. I backed up, letting the guy open it fully. He smiled. I gestured with my hand, allowing him to come inside. I barely had anything in here. Nothing worth stealing if that's what he was after, so I hoped this would get him to be in and out quickly. As soon as he took a few steps and passed me into the room, I walked out the door and into the hallway. He turned and looked at me as if I had offended him by walking out. I just didn't want to be trapped in a small room with this random big dude. He glanced around my room for a few seconds, then came back into the hallway, and without saying another word, he left. I had no clue what had just happened, but the more thought I gave it, the crazier it seemed. Thinking about his appearance, I knew it was snowing, so it wasn't odd that he was wearing thick winter clothing. But what was odd was that he seemed to have just come from outside. His jacket had water droplets from recently melted snow, and his nose was red like he'd been out in the cold, snowy night for a while. I just didn't understand. What random student would go straight from outside of my dorm room on the 3rd floor and knock on my door at 10 p.m.? Why was he even asking me? How did he know I was here? There were 100 rooms in this building, and he happened to knock on mine. Nothing made sense at all, and it kept me up all night. I even moved my small dresser in front of my door, just in case. Before my parents picked me up the following day, I decided to walk over to the police department in downtown Chicago. When I told them what happened, they seemed to be a lot more interested than I'd expected. I answered a ton of questions until, finally, they told me what was going on after ruling me out for being suspect. A kid on the floor below mine was missing yesterday morning when his parents came to pick him up. He had no roommate, and with the building so empty, it made the case a lot more difficult. Obviously, hearing about the guy at my dorm last night, they thought it might be a good lead. But days turned to weeks and then months. I don't know what happened, as it's been many years. I think back about how that guy in my room knew that someone was missing and said it was his roommate, but obviously he was lying. I don't think he ever turned up either. I also think about why he came to my room specifically and if he planned to make me go missing as well. He also could have just been some random guy looking for his friend, but that seems unlikely due to all the coincidences. There's so much I don't know, and unfortunately, we'll probably never know. I drive for a local grocery chain in my area. It's not a full-size semi-truck. It's more of a large van, but I usually have an 8 to 10-hour route that goes between 3 to 4 stores. It's a pretty simple job that pays nice enough and gives me little to no stress. The only time things do get stressful is in winter. The van struggles in the snowy conditions, and with thousands of dollars worth of cargo in the back, it puts a bit of stress on me. This winter had been worse than most, with more snowfall, ice, and foggy conditions. On December 19th, I had to stop at 4 stores in Minneapolis. It was snowing a decent amount, but the plows were keeping up with the roads, so there weren't too many issues. By the time I finished unloading the last of the cargo at the 4th store, it was 8 p.m., and the snow had started piling up a bit more on the road. Dark, snowy, and unplowed roads are never a good combo when driving. One thing to mention as well is that large trucks and vans have an easier time managing the snow when they are heavier, giving them more traction. So, with no more cargo in the back of my van, I had to drive extra carefully since the back wheels were lighter and could slide out easily. The start of the drive back went well, but the farther out I got towards the warehouse in St. Paul, the less plowed the roads were. There was a long stretch of road leading directly to the shipping facility, and I was worried it wouldn't be plowed at all, given how bad the main roads were. This wasn't the primary entrance either, just a side route that a lot of drivers, including myself, used when coming in from the west. It shaved nearly 5 minutes off the drive, so whenever it was clear, I took it. Turning onto the road, I was surprised to see it had been plowed recently. There was barely any snow, which was unusual since this road only led to industrial buildings and usually wasn't a priority for plowing crews. Relieved, I kept a steady pace, my van rolling smoothly over the pavement. I don't even remember what I was thinking about. Probably just my plans for the rest of the night after my shift, when suddenly the road ahead was packed with snow. It was as if a wall of white had been dropped right in front of me. I slammed on my brakes, barely stopping in time. My heart was pounding as I stared ahead in disbelief. The road was completely unplowed beyond that point. It didn't make sense. Who would clear half the road and just stop so abruptly? There wasn't even a place to turn around, meaning whoever plowed it must have gone all the way in, then backed out the same way. It was strange, and after the initial shock, I started feeling frustrated. I left my van running and stepped out into the cold. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked closer to the blocked road. That's when I noticed something scattered across the pavement behind me. Walking over, I saw a pile of equipment, metal parts, wires, and other components I couldn't immediately recognize. They looked expensive and definitely out of place, almost like they'd fallen off a truck heading to the facility. Something about the whole situation felt off. I climbed back in my van, put in reverse, and started backing out. At the time, I told myself I was just overreacting, but there was this gnawing feeling in my gut, like I had just driven into the middle of something I shouldn't have seen. By the time I made it back to the main roads, I decided to take the official entrance instead. As I pulled into the lot, my work phone buzzed. It was the night manager, which was extremely unusual. The second I answered, he asked if I was okay. Then, without waiting for my response, he told me to avoid the back road at all costs. My stomach dropped. I told him I had already taken the main entrance, but I went inside to talk to him anyway. That's when he explained another driver, coming from a different facility, had been ambushed and robbed on that same road not even 20 minutes earlier. Police were already on the way. Everything clicked in my mind at once. I told him what happened to me, about the sudden wall of snow and the equipment on the ground. He just nodded grimly. It didn't take long for the guys behind it to get caught. The equipment they stole had built-in tracking devices, and within hours, authorities had them in custody. It turned out to be a group of young men who had deliberately created a trap, plowing part of the road, waiting for a truck to enter, then blocking their only exit before robbing them at gunpoint. For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling of how close I'd come to being their next victim. If I had arrived just minutes earlier, I would have been the one trapped in that dead end, staring down the barrel of a gun.